The rifle sight painted a red dot on Jake Morrison's chest. Then another, then a third. 3 laser beams cutting through the smoke and dust like accusatory fingers pointing at his heart. He didn't move. Around him, the abandoned training compound groaned with the weight of its own decay. Broken windows stared down like empty eye sockets. The smell of cordite hung thick in the air, mixing with the metallic taste of fear and adrenaline. Somewhere in the darkness behind him, Isaiah Carter pressed a hand against the wound in his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers in rhythmic pulses. The voice came from beyond the smoke, hard, cold, certain. "Morrison, you're just like your traitor father. You'll get us all killed." Jake's jaw tightened. The words cut deeper than any blade because they echoed the accusations that had followed him since his father's trial. Since Colonel David Morrison's name had been stripped from the Wall of Honor at Quantico. Since the Marine Corps pretended one of its finest officers had never existed. His finger hovered over the trigger of his own rifle. Training said to fire. Instinct said to run. But the voice in his head, the one that sounded like his father during those early morning runs along the beach at Coronado, that voice said something else entirely. When they underestimate you, let them. Jake's decision came in the space between heartbeats. Save the team or complete the mission. Honor or duty. His father's legacy or his own survival. He chose, and the world exploded into chaos. But that moment, that choice, that reckoning, it all began 6 months earlier, on a day when the rain fell like judgment on a cemetery that wanted nothing to do with shame. 3 months earlier, the cemetery stretched across a hillside in rural Virginia like a field of broken teeth. Small markers, weathered stone, American flags planted beside some graves, wilted and forgotten beside others. The rain came down in sheets, turning the dirt paths to mud and the grass to a slick carpet of green that squelched under Jake's boots. He was 19 years old, 6'1", broad shoulders already starting to fill out with the kind of muscle that came from swinging a hammer on construction sites 12 hours a day. His hands were calloused, his eyes were older than his face. And as he stood beside the open grave, watching the plain wooden casket being lowered into the earth, he felt something inside him harden into cold purpose. No honor guard, no flag, no 21-gun salute cracking across the Virginia hills to announce that a warrior had gone home. Just Jake, his mother, and Rain. The headstone was already in place. Simple granite, no embellishments. The engraver had done his job with the enthusiasm of a man carving lies. David Morrison, Colonel, USMC 1969-24. No mention of service. No eagle, globe, and anchor. No Semper Fidelis carved beneath his name. The Marine Corps had stripped all that away when they stripped away his honor, his rank, his life. Jake's mother stood beside him, her black dress clinging to her thin frame, her face a mask of bitterness that had deepened with every year since the trial. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried at the trial either, or during the appeals, or when they'd moved David Morrison from Quantico to Leavenworth, or when the call came 3 months ago that his heart had given out in his cell. She'd used up all her tears somewhere in the middle, and what remained was something harder than grief, something closer to hate. "Are you satisfied now?" she said quietly, not looking at Jake. Following him into the grave? Jake said nothing. He'd learned long ago that his mother's anger wasn't really aimed at him. It was aimed at the ghost standing between them, the man being lowered into the ground, the Marine who'd chosen honor over family and lost everything in the bargain. "He destroyed us," she continued, her voice barely audible over the rain. "And you're going to let him destroy you too." Jake's hands clenched at his sides. He wanted to defend his father. Wanted to shout that the trial was a lie, that the evidence was fabricated, that someone had set David Morrison up to take the fall for sins he never committed. But the words wouldn't come. They never did. Because deep down, in a place he didn't like to examine too closely, Jake wondered if maybe his mother was right. Maybe his father had been a traitor. Maybe the 47 Marines who died in Afghanistan in 2003 had died because David Morrison leaked classified intelligence to the enemy. Maybe everything Jake believed about honor and duty and the Corps was just a fairy tale he'd been telling himself to avoid facing the truth. The funeral director cleared his throat politely. The grave was filled. The rain was getting worse. It was time to go. Jake's mother turned without a word and walked toward the parking lot, her heels sinking into the mud with every step. Jake stayed. He stood there in the rain, staring at the fresh earth, waiting for something. A sign, a voice, some indication that his father's spirit was still fighting, still proclaiming his innocence from beyond the grave. Nothing came. Jake was about to turn away when he noticed the woman. Older, maybe mid-40s, standing 50 yards away beneath an oak tree, wearing a dark suit and a Marine Corps tie that even from this distance Jake recognized. Her face was weathered, with the kind of scars that spoke of years under harsh suns and harsher circumstances. Her left hand hung at her side, but her right was raised in a salute. Saluting a disgraced officer. Saluting a traitor. Jake's breath caught. He took a step toward the woman, but before he could call out, she lowered her hand, turned and disappeared into the rain. By the time Jake reached the oak tree, there was no sign of her except for a single piece of paper, folded and tucked beneath a stone to keep it from blowing away. Jake picked it up. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, official, stamped with classifications and redactions, but enough words remained visible to make Jake's hands shake. Operation Sandstorm. Classified weapons shipment, Pakistan border, 2003. And there, in a list of names, his father's, Colonel David Morrison, compromise operative. But in the margin, in handwriting Jake recognized from 1,000 birthday cards and report cards and notes left on the refrigerator, his father had written, Crawford knows. Vale executed. 47 Marines died because the rest was torn away, ripped, gone. Jake stood there in the rain, staring at the fragment, feeling the hardened purpose in his chest begin to crack. His father had left him a message, a clue, a thread to pull. Someone had set David Morrison up. Someone named Crawford. Someone named Vale. And somewhere in the machinery of the military-industrial complex, the truth was waiting to be excavated. Jake folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. Then he looked back at the fresh grave one more time. "I'll find it, Dad," he whispered. "I swear to God, I'll find the truth." The rain answered with thunder. The grave remained silent, and Jake Morrison walked away from his father's funeral with a purpose burning in his chest hotter than any grief. 30 days later, the apartment smelled like sawdust and instant coffee. Jake sat at a card table that served as his desk, surrounded by construction blueprints during the day and conspiracy research at night. His laptop glowed in the darkness, casting blue light across printouts and photographs and timelines he'd drawn in marker on poster board. He'd spent the last month becoming an expert on Operation Sandstorm. August 2003. Joint Special Operations Command sent a Marine Expeditionary Unit into the mountains along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Intelligence suggested a major Taliban weapons cache. Coalition forces were supposed to hit it fast, secure the weapons, and extract before enemy reinforcements arrived. Instead, they walked into an ambush. 47 Marines killed, another 30 wounded. The weapons cache was empty. The intelligence was bad, and the investigation that followed pointed straight at Colonel David Morrison, who'd been the operations officer responsible for vetting the intelligence. Except David Morrison wasn't even in Afghanistan when the leak happened. He was stateside, Fort Bragg, working on logistics for a completely different operation. Jake had found the duty rosters, the travel vouchers, the paper trail that proved his father couldn't have been the leak. But none of that mattered during the court-martial. Somehow, encrypted communications had been found on David Morrison's computer. Bank transfers to offshore accounts. Meetings with suspected enemy contacts. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, and according to every instinct Jake possessed, completely fabricated. Someone had framed his father. The question was who and why. Jake's research kept circling back to two names: Major Richard Vale, who'd been a captain in 2003 and was one of the officers who discovered the encrypted files on David Morrison's computer, and Senator James Crawford, who'd been on the Senate Armed Services Committee and had overseen the investigation into Operation Sandstorm. Crawford and Vale. Both men had risen considerably in the years since David Morrison fell. Crawford was now chairman of the Defense Appropriations Committee, one of the most powerful senators in Washington. Vale was a decorated major stationed at Camp Pendleton, training the next generation of elite Marine reconnaissance operators. Jake stared at Vale's official photo on the screen. Handsome, square-jawed, chest full of medals. The kind of Marine who looked like he'd been cast by Hollywood to play a Marine. Something about his eyes bothered Jake, though. They were calculating, cold. The eyes of a man who knew exactly how to smile while stabbing you in the back. Jake's phone buzzed. Text from his mother, "Please don't do this, just let it go." She'd found out he'd been researching the trial. She was afraid. Afraid he'd dig too deep. Afraid he'd end up like his father, destroyed by forces too powerful to fight. Jake deleted the message without responding. He couldn't let it go. Wouldn't. Not when his father's name was carved into that gravestone like an epitaph of shame. Not when 47 Marines had died and the real traitor was still walking free, probably sleeping soundly in his bed every night, while David Morrison rotted in a grave with no flag. Jake pulled up the Marine Corps recruiting website. He'd been thinking about this for days, turning it over in his mind, looking for alternatives. But every path led to the same conclusion. If he wanted to clear his father's name, he needed access. Access to classified files. Access to the people who'd been there. Access to the truth. And there was only one way to get that access. Jake clicked on the link, started filling out the application. Name, date of birth, education, previous military service, none, desired MOS, infantry, desired duty station, any. But in the comment section where recruits could express preferences or ask questions, Jake typed, "Interested in Marine Reconnaissance Training Program, Camp Pendleton preferred." He hit submit before he could second-guess himself. The confirmation screen appeared. A recruiter would contact him within 48 hours. Jake sat back, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him. He thought about his father, about the funeral with no flag, about the 47 names on the wall, Marines who deserved justice as much as David Morrison did. He thought about the photograph of Major Richard Vale and wondered what the man's face would look like when Jake Morrison walked into his training company and started asking questions. The laptop screen dimmed. Jake's reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. 19 years old, alone, about to walk into the lion's den with nothing but a fragment of paper and a promise to a dead man. Outside, somewhere in the Virginia night, a dog barked. Cars passed on the wet street. The world continued turning, indifferent to one boy's quest for truth. But Jake Morrison wasn't a boy anymore. He'd buried that version of himself in the rain beside his father's grave. What remained was something harder, something forged in the fire of injustice and tempered in the cold water of determination. He was going to join the Marines. He was going to find Major Richard Vale. And he was going to make someone answer for what they'd done to David Morrison and the 47 Marines who died because of lies. Always faithful. His father had lived by those words, had died by them in a prison cell, alone and dishonored. Jake would make sure they meant something again. 45 days later, the bus rolled through the gates of Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego at 0400, and Jake's new life began before the sun rose. The drill instructors were waiting, 3 of them standing at parade rest on the yellow footprints painted on the asphalt, their campaign hats tilted at angles that made their faces disappear into shadow. Behind them, the base stretched out in the pre-dawn darkness, all straight lines and right angles, every building the same shade of institutional beige. Jake filed off the bus with 40 other recruits, all of them civilians playing at being Marines. They stood on the footprints, toes on the painted edges, heels together, trying to remember everything the recruiter had told them about standing at attention. Then the world exploded into noise. "You have 5 seconds to get your worthless civilian bodies on my footprints. Move! Move! Move!" The drill instructor's voice was a weapon. It cut through the morning air like a blade, sharp and precise, and designed to strip away every comfortable lie a man told himself about who he was and what he was capable of. Jake moved. They all moved, stumbling, scrambling, fighting for position on the painted yellow footprints, while the drill instructors circled like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. "Eyeballs, click!" Jake snapped his eyes forward, stared at the back of the head in front of him, fought the urge to look around, to assess, to understand his environment. That was civilian thinking. Marines didn't think. They obeyed. The senior drill instructor stepped forward. Staff Sergeant Martinez. Jake could see his name tape now, barely visible in the yellow light of the street lamps. Martinez moved like a predator, all controlled violence and coiled energy. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority earned through blood and fire. "From this moment forward, you will not think. You will not question. You will not exist as individuals. You are my recruits. You belong to me, and I will break every single one of you down to your component parts and rebuild you into United States Marines." He paused, looked down the line. His eyes moved from face to face, assessing, cataloging, identifying the weak links in the chain. Sound off with your name when I point at you. He started at the far end. One by one, the recruits called out their names, voices cracking with nerves and exhaustion. Jake waited his turn, heart hammering against his ribs. This was it, the moment of truth, the moment when everyone would know who he was and what he carried. Martinez reached Jake, pointed. You, Jake Morrison, sir? The entire line went still. Martinez's face didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition. Jake saw one of the other drill instructors lean in, whisper something. Martinez nodded, almost imperceptibly. Morrison, Martinez's voice was quieter now, which somehow made it more dangerous. Any relation to Colonel David Morrison? Every head turned, every eye locked on Jake. The weight of their stares was physical, pressing down on his shoulders like lead. Jake kept his eyes forward. Yes, sir, he was my father, sir. Was your father a traitor, Morrison? The question hit like a punch. Jake's jaw clenched. His fists tightened at his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to defend his father, to shout the truth, to make them all understand that David Morrison was innocent. But he'd learned something in the weeks since the funeral. The truth didn't matter if no one was listening. The truth was a luxury you earned through action, not words. My father was a Marine, sir, Jake said, voice steady. The rest is between him and God. Martinez stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. Get on my quarterdeck, Morrison, push-ups, now. Jake dropped, started pumping out push-ups on the rough asphalt. His arms burned, his chest screamed, but he kept going, counting in his head, focusing on the rhythm, the movement, the simple mechanical act of pushing his body beyond its limits. Above him, Martinez's voice continued down the line, collecting names, cataloging faces. But Jake knew the damage was done. Everyone knew who he was now. The traitor's son, the walking shame, the recruit who'd never escape his father's shadow. Good, Jake thought, pushing through rep number 50. Let them think that. Let them underestimate me. Let them believe I'm here to prove something. Because the truth was simpler and more dangerous than any of them could imagine. Jake Morrison wasn't here to become a Marine. He was here to become a weapon. And he was going to point that weapon straight at the heart of the conspiracy that had killed his father and 47 better men. He just had to survive boot camp first. Week 3. The California sun beat down on the rifle range with the intensity of divine judgment. Jake lay in the prone position, rifle pressed against his shoulder, eye aligned with the sight, breathing controlled and measured. 300 meters down range, the target waited. Black circles on white paper, bullseye at the center. Next to him, 50 other recruits lay in similar positions. The smell of gun oil and hot brass filled the air. Somewhere behind them, drill instructors prowled the line, watching, correcting, occasionally screaming at someone who'd forgotten to keep their finger off the trigger. Jake's world narrowed to the sight picture. Front sight post, rear aperture, target. Breathe in, breathe out. Find the natural respiratory pause between breaths. That's where the shot lives. In that moment of stillness, between heartbeats. His father had taught him that years ago, before the trial, before the shame, when David Morrison was still a Marine and Jake was just a kid who thought his dad hung the moon. They'd gone to a civilian range outside Quantico. His father had shown him the fundamentals. Sight alignment, sight picture, trigger squeeze. Most people think shooting is about strength, his father had said, but it's really about control, controlling your breath, controlling your heartbeat, controlling the fear that makes your hands shake. Jake squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked. The target, 300 meters away, acquired a new hole. Center mass, perfect shot. Cease fire! The range safety officer's voice cut through the afternoon. Make your rifles safe. Stand by for scoring. Jake cleared his weapon, checked the chamber, ensured it was empty. Around him, other recruits did the same. Their movements slow and deliberate. Every action performed exactly as they'd been taught. Marines didn't rush. They executed. The scoring team moved downrange with spotting scopes and clipboards. Jake waited, knowing his score already. He'd fired expert on every qualification so far. Rifle, pistol, machine gun. His muscle memory was too good, too deeply ingrained from those childhood sessions with his father. Morrison! Staff Sergeant Martinez appeared beside him, clipboard in hand. You shot expert again, 4th week in a row. Yes, sir. Martinez crouched down, his voice dropping so only Jake could hear. That's the problem, recruit. You're too good, too polished. Where'd you learn to shoot like that? Jake kept his eyes forward. My father taught me, sir. Your traitor father. The words should have hurt, should have ignited the anger Jake kept banked in his chest. But he'd heard them so many times now, from drill instructors and fellow recruits alike, that they'd lost their sting. He'd become numb to the shame, inoculated against the judgment. Yes, sir, Jake said, my father. Martinez was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, brushing dust off his trousers. There's a new senior drill instructor arriving next week. Master Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Reeves. Vietnam-era Marine, old school. Word is she knew your father back in the day. Jake's pulse quickened, but he kept his face neutral. Understood, sir. She specifically requested to oversee your training. I don't know if that's good news or bad news for you, Morrison, but I'd keep my head down if I were you. Martinez walked away, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts and the cooling barrel of his rifle. A drill instructor who knew his father. That could be a disaster or an opportunity, depending on whose side Reeves had been on during the trial. Jake lay back down in the prone position, staring downrange at the targets. 300 meters. The distance between him and the truth felt much longer. That night, the barracks after lights out was a cavern of controlled breathing and suppressed snoring. 60 recruits packed into rows of steel racks, trying to steal whatever sleep they could before the next day's brutality began at 0:30. Jake lay in his rack, staring at the ceiling, unable to quiet his mind. His body was exhausted. 14-hour days of running, drilling, training, being torn down and rebuilt one push-up at a time. But his brain refused to surrender to sleep. He thought about the fragment of paper hidden in his personal effects, about Operation Sandstorm, about 47 names carved on a wall, about Major Richard Vale, who was somewhere on this very base, training reconnaissance Marines, sleeping soundly while the ghosts of dead men haunted Jake's dreams. A sound cut through the darkness. Footsteps. Quiet. Measured. Jake's eyes snapped open, tracking the movement through the barracks. Someone was walking between the racks, checking each recruit. Not a drill instructor. The footsteps were too soft, too cautious. The figure stopped at Jake's rack. Jake tensed, ready to react if this was some kind of hazing ritual, some test of his loyalty or his courage. A voice whispered in the darkness, young, uncertain. Morrison? Jake recognized the voice. Isaiah Carter, recruit from South Chicago, tall, lean, quiet, one of the few people who hadn't treated Jake like a pariah since the first day. They'd been paired together during a land navigation exercise, and Isaiah had simply said, I don't care who your father was. All I care is whether you can read a map. What do you want, Carter? Jake whispered back. Isaiah crouched beside the rack, his face barely visible in the ambient light from the emergency exit signs. Can't sleep, keep thinking about why I'm here. Why are you here? Same reason as everyone else. Trying to be something more than what I was. What about you, really? Jake considered lying. Considered giving the standard answer about serving his country and earning the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. But something about Isaiah's tone, the genuine curiosity in his voice, made Jake pause. I'm here to find the truth, Jake said finally, about what happened to my father. Isaiah was quiet for a moment. You think he was innocent? I know he was. Then why are you here? Why not go to the press? Why not hire lawyers and investigators? Because the people who framed him are inside the system, Jake said. The only way to fight them is from inside too. Isaiah nodded slowly. That's dangerous. You know that, right? Poking around in military conspiracies. That's how people disappear. My father already disappeared. They erased him, took his name off the wall, pretended he never existed. I'm not going to let that stand. You're going to need help, Isaiah said. Nobody takes on the system alone and wins. Jake looked at him, trying to read his expression in the darkness. Why are you telling me this? Because I watched you these last 3 weeks. You're the best recruit in this platoon, and everyone treats you like garbage. But you never quit, never complain, just keep pushing. That tells me something about who you are. Isaiah extended his hand. So if you need someone to watch your back when the time comes, I'm volunteering. Jake stared at the offered hand. This was the moment, the choice, trust or isolation, brotherhood or solo mission. His father had fought alone, and it had destroyed him. Maybe Jake needed to learn from that mistake. He gripped Isaiah's hand. Firm, solid, a pact made in darkness. "Welcome to the war, Carter," Jake whispered. Isaiah smiled. "Always faithful, brother." The footsteps retreated. Isaiah returned to his own rack, and Jake lay back down, feeling something shift in his chest. He wasn't alone anymore. That changed everything. Week 7. The day Master Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Reeves arrived at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, the weather turned ugly. Storm clouds rolled in off the Pacific, turning the sky the color of gunmetal and dropping the temperature 20 degrees. Rain threatened but didn't fall, leaving the air thick with tension and humidity. Jake stood in formation with the rest of his platoon on the parade deck, waiting for their new senior drill instructor to address them. Staff Sergeant Martinez had been reassigned. In his place stood a woman who looked like she'd been forged in fire and quenched in ice water. Master Gunnery Sergeant Reeves was somewhere in her mid-40s. Scars crisscrossed her forearms, visible beneath her rolled-up sleeves. Her left hand was missing the tip of her pinky finger. A long, faded scar ran from her jaw to her ear, the kind of scar that came from shrapnel or close-quarters combat. Her eyes were the color of winter ice, and when she looked at the formation, Jake felt like he was being dissected and cataloged. "I am Master Gunnery Sergeant Reeves," the woman said, her voice gravelly and precise, like gravel being crushed under tank treads. "Most of you will call me Master Gunnery Sergeant. Some of you will call me ma'am. None of you will call me by my first name unless you want to spend the next 3 days doing burpees in the sandpit." She paused, letting that sink in, then continued. "I served in the Marine Corps for 26 years. I have been deployed to more countries than you have fingers. I have led men and women in combat. I have earned the right to stand here and tell you that most of you will fail. Most of you will quit. Most of you will go home to your mothers and your girlfriends and your comfortable civilian lives, and you will tell yourselves that you tried." Reeves's eyes moved across the formation, cataloging, assessing. They landed on Jake, stayed there. "But some of you," Reeves continued, still looking at Jake, "will succeed, will become Marines, will earn the title. And when you do, you will understand that being a Marine is not about strength or courage or even honor. It is about faithfulness to your brothers, to your Corps, to the oath you swear." She stepped down from the platform, walked directly to Jake, stood inches away, close enough that Jake could smell coffee and gun oil on her breath. "Morrison," Reeves said quietly. "Jake Morrison, son of David Morrison." "Yes, Master Gunnery Sergeant. Your father was the finest Marine I ever served with." The words hit like an electric shock. Jake's eyes widened. Around him, other recruits shifted, confused. This wasn't the script they expected. This wasn't the condemnation and shame. "Your father saved my life in Fallujah," Reeves continued. "Took shrapnel meant for me. Carried me 400 meters to the extraction point while I bled from 11 wounds. He could have left me, should have, tactically, but he didn't, because Marines don't leave Marines behind." Jake's throat tightened, his vision blurred. He forced himself to keep his eyes forward, to maintain bearing, to be a Marine even as his world tilted on its axis. "So when I heard his son was in my recruit platoon," Reeves said, "I made sure I was assigned here, because I owe David Morrison a debt I can never repay. The only thing I can do is make sure his son becomes the Marine his father was." Reeves stepped back, raised her voice so the entire platoon could hear. "Anyone in this formation has a problem with Recruit Morrison. You can take it up with me personally. Is that understood?" "Yes, Master Gunnery Sergeant." The response was immediate, unanimous, deafening. Jake felt something break open in his chest, some tightly held place he'd kept locked since the funeral. His father had saved this woman's life, had been a hero, not a traitor, and someone, somewhere, had destroyed him for it. Reeves dismissed the formation. As the recruits broke to head to the chow hall, she grabbed Jake's arm. "Walk with me, son." They moved away from the parade deck, toward the perimeter of the base where the fence line met the Pacific. The ocean churned gray and angry beyond the wire. Seabirds wheeled overhead, crying their mournful calls. "Your father was murdered," Reeves said without preamble. "They called it a heart attack, but I know better. Someone wanted him silenced." Jake's hands clenched into fists. "Who?" "Same people who framed him for Operation Sandstorm. I don't have names, but I have suspicions. Your father told me, right before his trial, that he'd uncovered something big. He said there were officers in the Corps taking money from defense contractors, rigging procurement contracts, sending Marines into combat with faulty equipment so their friends could profit. He was going to expose them, Jake said. It wasn't a question. He tried. They destroyed him first, made him the fall guy for Sandstorm. 47 Marines died, and they needed someone to blame. Your father was convenient. He'd been asking too many questions, making too many powerful people nervous. Reeves stopped walking, turned to face Jake directly. In the gray light, she looked older, wearier, like a woman carrying the weight of decades. I couldn't save your father, Reeves said, but I can help you. If you want justice, if you want the truth, I can point you in the right direction. Where? Jake's voice was hoarse. Camp Pendleton, Reconnaissance Training Company. There's an officer there, Major Richard Vale. He was the one who discovered the evidence against your father. But here's the twist. She paused. Vale's uncle is Senator James Crawford, the same Crawford who chaired the committee that buried your father's appeal. Family connections, political power. That's how they got away with it. Jake's heart hammered. This was bigger than he'd imagined. Not just corruption, a conspiracy that reached into the Senate. How do I get to Pendleton? You finish boot camp at the top of your class. You volunteer for reconnaissance training. You get yourself assigned to Vale's company, and then you make him confess. And if he doesn't, Reeves's smile was cold and sharp as a knife. Then you make him wish he had. I'll be watching, Morrison. I'll help where I can. But this is your fight, your father's legacy. You want to clear his name? You have to be willing to walk into hell and drag the devil out by his horns. Jake looked out at the ocean. The waves crashed against the shore, relentless and eternal. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, his father's spirit was waiting for justice, waiting for vindication, waiting for his son to finish what he'd started. I'll do it, Jake said, whatever it takes. Reeves nodded, placed a scarred hand on Jake's shoulder. Good. One more thing you need to know. Your father wasn't perfect. In Caracas, the mission that went bad, he made a choice. Chose the mission objective over extracting his team early when intel suggested compromise. 3 Marines died because of that call. It haunted him for years. Jake's breath caught. He made a mistake? He was human. Even heroes make mistakes. But the difference between your father and Vale is this. Your father learned from his mistakes. Vale profits from his. Remember that when you face him. Jake nodded slowly, absorbing this new information. His father wasn't a saint, was flawed. But that made his innocence in Operation Sandstorm even more important to prove. Reeves turned and walked back toward the barracks, leaving Jake alone with the ocean and his thoughts. Jake pulled out the fragment of paper he'd been carrying since the funeral. The words were faded now, worn from constant handling, but they were still legible, still damning. Crawford knows, Vale executed. 47 Marines died because now he had a face to go with the name. Major Richard Vale, Camp Pendleton, Reconnaissance Training Company, and a senator's nephew with enough power to bury the truth. Jake folded the paper and tucked it back in his pocket. Then he turned his face to the storm clouds and made a silent promise. I'm coming for you, Vale. I'm coming for all of you. And when I'm done, the whole world will know what you did to my father and those 47 Marines. The rain finally started to fall. Jake didn't move. He stood there and let it wash over him, baptizing him in cold purpose and hot determination. The crucible had begun, and Jake Morrison would not break, could not break, because too many ghosts were depending on him, his father, the 47. Every Marine who'd ever been betrayed by the system they'd sworn to serve. Jake would be their weapon, their voice, their justice. He would finish boot camp. He would join reconnaissance training. He would walk into Richard Vale's world with patience and precision. And he would not stop until the truth was carved into the world with the same brutal efficiency his father had once used to save Sarah Reeves's life in the streets of Fallujah. This was the mission now, the only mission that mattered. Clear the family name, honor the fallen, make the guilty pay. Always faithful to the end, Jake turned and walked back toward the barracks, leaving wet footprints in his wake. Behind him, the ocean continued its eternal assault on the shore. Ahead of him, the future waited like a loaded weapon. And somewhere in the storm, Jake could have sworn he heard his father's voice, carried on the wind, saying the words he'd said every morning when Jake was young. Make them remember, son. Make them remember what it means to be a Marine. Jake would, or he would die trying. The graduation ceremony at Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego lasted exactly 43 minutes. 43 minutes for 12 weeks of hell to be transformed into something that looked clean and ceremonial under the California sun. Families cheered, Cameras flashed. Drill instructors who'd spent 3 months breaking men down now stood at attention, their faces masks of professional pride. Jake Morrison stood in formation wearing dress blues for the first time in his life. The uniform felt foreign, stiff, but right. On his chest, the eagle, globe, and anchor gleamed in the sunlight. The emblem his father had worn, the emblem they'd stripped away when they stripped away his honor. Jake's mother hadn't come. He'd sent the invitation knowing she wouldn't. The distance between them had grown too wide, carved deeper by Jake's refusal to let his father's memory rest. She wanted to move on, to forget, to bury the shame along with the man. Jake wanted the opposite. He wanted to dig up every buried truth and force the world to look at it. Master Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Reeves stood at the front of the formation, calling out names. When she reached Jake, their eyes met. Reeves gave the slightest nod, not approval, not congratulations, just acknowledgement. The real battle was just beginning. After the ceremony, Jake collected his orders. Camp Pendleton, California, Reconnaissance Training Company. Report date, 7 days. Isaiah Carter appeared beside him, his own orders in hand. Same destination, same report date. They'd both volunteered for reconnaissance training, knowing the odds of making it through were worse than basic. 60% washout rate, physical standards that bordered on superhuman. Mental pressure designed to break anyone who wasn't absolutely committed to becoming the deadliest kind of Marine. "You ready for this?" Isaiah asked, folding his orders into his pocket. Jake thought about Major Richard Vale, about his father's fragment of paper, about 47 names on a wall, about Senator Crawford's shadow looming over everything. "I've been ready since the day I buried my father." They walked across the parade deck together, newly minted Marines with 7 days of freedom before the next crucible began. Other recruits celebrated with families, posed for photographs, laughed with the relief of men who'd survived something difficult and come out stronger. Jake felt none of that. He felt like a round that had just been chambered. "There's something you should know," Isaiah said as they reached the barracks. "About Pendleton, about what we're walking into." Jake stopped. "What?" "I did some asking around, talked to some guys who've been through reconnaissance training. They say Vale runs the hardest company in the Corps, makes the drill instructors here look like kindergarten teachers. But that's not the scary part." "What's the scary part?" Isaiah's voice dropped. "They say he has a reputation for accidents. Recruits who wash out with injuries that seem a little too convenient. Training exercises that go wrong in ways that can't quite be explained. Nothing provable. Nothing that raises official flags. But the guys who've been there, they know. Vale doesn't just break people. He destroys them if he thinks they're a threat." Jake absorbed this information with cold clarity. "Good, then he'll see me coming." "That's what I'm worried about, brother. You want justice, I get it. But revenge makes you predictable, makes you vulnerable. Whatever you're planning, you need to be smarter than him." "I will be." Isaiah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you're not doing this alone. We're brothers now. That means your fight is my fight." They gripped hands. The pact made in darkness 3 weeks ago, now renewed in sunlight. Jake felt the weight of it, the responsibility. He'd been prepared to sacrifice himself for the truth. But bringing Isaiah into the line of fire, that was different. That required him to be more careful, more calculating, because now someone else's life was tied to his crusade. 7 days, Jake said. Make peace with whatever gods you pray to, because when we walk through those gates at Pendleton, we're walking into war. Isaiah smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Always faithful, brother. Always faithful. 7 days later, Camp Pendleton sprawled across 125,000 acres of Southern California coastline, like a small nation dedicated entirely to the art of war. Jake and Isaiah arrived on a bus with 38 other Marines, all of them volunteers for reconnaissance training, all of them believers in their own exceptionality. The bus stopped in front of a cluster of buildings that looked like they'd been designed by someone who hated comfort. Concrete blocks, small windows. Everything painted the same institutional beige that seemed to be the Marine Corps' favorite color. Beyond the buildings, training areas stretched into the distance. Obstacle courses, shooting ranges, mock villages for urban combat training, and farther still, the mountains, where the real suffering would happen. The door hissed open. A voice cut through the afternoon heat like a blade. "You have 10 seconds to get off my bus and form up on the painted line. Move!" Jake moved. They all moved, boots thundering down the bus steps, Gear bags slamming against legs, 40 Marines trying to form a perfect line in the chaos of arrival. Jake found his spot, dropped his gear, snapped to attention. Beside him, Isaiah did the same. Around them, the rest of the volunteers fought for position, for composure, for any scrap of dignity they could maintain. The instructor who'd shouted them off the bus was a staff sergeant with the build of a professional fighter and eyes that suggested he enjoyed violence more than was professionally appropriate. His name tape read Decker. Jake filed the name away, cataloged it as potential threat. "I am Staff Sergeant Troy Decker," the man said, pacing the line like a predator selecting prey. "For the next 6 months, I will be your worst nightmare, your alarm clock, your dietary consultant, your physical therapist, your confessor, and for most of you, I will be the last Marine Corps instructor you ever see, because you will quit. You will ring the bell. You will go home crying to whatever civilian life you came from." He stopped in front of a recruit 3 spots down from Jake. "What's your name, Marine?" "Private Tommy Brennan, Staff Sergeant." "Where are you from, Brennan?" "Boston, Staff Sergeant." "Boston." Decker's smile was predatory. "Let me guess, your old man was a Marine. Maybe your grandfather, too. You think that gives you some kind of advantage here? Some kind of genetic superiority?" "No, Staff Sergeant." "You're right about that. Because I don't care about your bloodline. I don't care about your heritage. All I care about is whether you can keep up. Can you keep up, Brennan?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant." Decker moved on, stopped in front of Isaiah, looked him up and down with theatrical skepticism. "You look soft, Marine. You look like you've spent too much time in the city eating good food and not enough time suffering." Isaiah kept his eyes forward. "I can keep up, Staff Sergeant." "We'll see about that." Decker continued down the line, stopped in front of a Latino Marine with the quiet intensity of a coiled spring. "Name?" "Private Carlos Reyes, Staff Sergeant." "Reyes, you look like you know how to work, like you understand suffering. That true?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant. Texas Border Staff Sergeant. I understand hard." Decker nodded approval, then moved to Jake, stopped, stared. Something flickered across his face, recognition. The same look Martinez had given Jake on the first day of boot camp. "Morrison," Decker said quietly. "Jake Morrison." "Yes, Staff Sergeant. Son of Colonel David Morrison." Every head turned. Again. Always. The curse that followed Jake like a shadow. The stain that wouldn't wash clean, no matter how much blood he shed or how many miles he ran. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." Decker's smile widened. "Your father was a traitor. He got 47 Marines killed because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. You think you have what it takes to be reconnaissance? You think you can honor the Corps your father betrayed?" Jake's jaw clenched. Every muscle in his body screamed to move, to fight, to defend his father's name with violence. But Master Gunnery Sergeant Reeves's words echoed in his head. "Be smarter. Be patient." "My father was a Marine, Staff Sergeant," Jake said, voice flat, emotionless. "I'm here to be one too." "We'll see about that." Decker stepped back, addressing the entire formation now. "Tonight you will settle into your barracks. Tomorrow morning, 0400, your training begins. For the next 6 weeks you will run until your feet bleed. You will swim until your lungs burn. You will carry loads that would break pack animals. And at the end of those 6 weeks, maybe 15 of you will still be here. Maybe less." He paused, savoring the fear he could smell coming off the formation like sweat. "But first you need to meet your commanding officer, the man who decides whether you graduate or go home. Major Richard Vale." The name hit Jake like electricity. He forced himself to remain still, to show nothing. A figure emerged from the administration building. Tall, handsome in a way that seemed manufactured, chest full of ribbons, walking with the easy confidence of a man who'd never questioned his place in the world. Major Richard Vale looked exactly like his photograph, but seeing him in person was different. There was something in his eyes, something cold and predatory that the camera hadn't captured. Vale stood before the formation, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the Marines like a landowner inspecting livestock. "Gentlemen," Vale said, his voice smooth and assured, "welcome to Reconnaissance Training Company. You volunteered to be here. That tells me something about you. It tells me you believe you're special. Elite, better than the average Marine." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You're not. Not yet. Right now, you're just 40 bodies taking up space in my company. Over the next 6 months, I will determine which of you have what it takes to become reconnaissance Marines. The rest will be sent back to regular infantry, where you can live out your careers as ordinary men doing ordinary things. Vale's eyes moved across the formation, landed on Jake, stayed there. Some of you come from military families. You think that gives you an advantage. You think the blood in your veins makes you warriors by birthright. He took a step closer to Jake. Jake Morrison, step forward. Jake's heart hammered, but his feet moved smoothly, mechanically. He marched to a position 3 paces in front of Vale, stood at attention. "You're Colonel David Morrison's son," Vale said. Not a question, a statement. "Yes, sir. I served with your father. He was my operations officer for a time, before the trial, before Operation Sandstorm." Jake said nothing. Vale was watching him like a scientist watching a specimen under glass, looking for reactions, cataloging weaknesses. "It was a shame what happened to him," Vale continued. "Tragic, really. A promising career destroyed by weakness, by the temptation of enemy money, by the willingness to betray brothers for personal gain." Jake's fist clenched at his sides. He couldn't help it, Vale noticed, smiled. "But I don't believe in genetic guilt, Morrison. I don't believe sons should pay for their father's sins, so I'm going to give you a fair chance, same chance as everyone else. If you can meet the standard, you'll graduate. If you can't, you'll go home. Simple as that." "Yes, sir." "Do you have what it takes to be a reconnaissance Marine, Morrison?" "Yes, sir." "We'll see." Vale turned to address the formation again. "Dismissed. Report to your barracks. Tomorrow we separate the men from the pretenders." The formation broke. Marines grabbed their gear and headed toward the barracks, talking in low voices, already forming the bonds that would either sustain them or break apart under pressure. Jake stood frozen for a moment, watching Vale walk back toward the administration building with Decker at his side. They were talking. Vale said something. Decker laughed. They both looked back at Jake. Then they disappeared inside, and Jake was left standing in the California heat, feeling like he'd just been marked for death. Isaiah appeared beside him. That was subtle. "He knows why I'm here. Or he's paranoid. Either way, you just painted a target on your back." Isaiah picked up his gear bag. "Come on, let's find our racks before someone else claims them." They headed toward the barracks. Tommy Brennan and Carlos Reyes caught up with them, their own gear slung over their shoulders. "That was intense," Tommy said. His Boston accent was thick enough to cut. "Anyone else get the feeling Vale's got it out for Morrison?" "Everyone got that feeling," Carlos said quietly. His voice carried the measured calm of someone who'd grown up learning when to speak and when to stay silent. "Question is why?" Jake looked at the 3 of them. Isaiah he trusted. They'd made their pact weeks ago. But these 2 were unknown variables. Still, something about them felt right. Tommy's fierce loyalty, Carlos's quiet strength. They reminded Jake of the stories his father used to tell about his own team, the brothers he'd served with before the betrayal. "Because my father discovered something," Jake said, making a decision. "Something that threatened powerful people. And Vale was part of covering it up." Tommy's eyes widened. "You're saying the traitor accusation was fake?" "I'm saying my father was murdered, and I'm here to prove it." Carlos was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "That's a heavy burden to carry alone." "He's not alone," Isaiah said. "I'm with him." Tommy looked between them, then grinned, a wild Irish grin that suggested he'd never met a fight he didn't want to join. "Hell, I'm in too. Always wanted to take down a corrupt officer. Sounds more interesting than regular training." Carlos sighed. "You're all going to get court-martialed, but I can't let you do something this stupid without someone smart watching your backs." He extended his hand. "Count me in." They stood in a circle, 4 Marines who'd known each other for less than an hour, making a pact that could end with all of them in prison or worse. Jake gripped each hand in turn, feeling the weight of brotherhood settling over them. "This isn't a game," Jake warned. "Vale is dangerous. People who cross him have accidents. If you're with me, you need to understand what we're risking." "We're Marines," Tommy said. "Risk is what we signed up for." "Then let's get settled," Isaiah said. "Tomorrow the real hell starts." They walked into the barracks together, 4 brothers who didn't know yet how much they'd need each other before this was over. The first month, hell had a schedule. It began at 0400 with a formation run, not a jog, not a warm-up, a full sprint carrying 60-pound packs across 10 miles of hills that seemed designed by a sadist who understood exactly how to destroy human knees and spirits simultaneously. Jake ran. They all ran. 40 Marines at the start. By the end of the first week, 36. By the end of the second week, 32. The washouts rang the bell that hung outside the company office, that brass bell that represented surrender, and they were gone within hours, sent back to regular infantry companies where the training didn't require superhuman endurance. Jake never thought about ringing the bell, even when his feet bled through his boots, even when his body screamed for rest, even when Decker appeared beside him during a mountain run and whispered, "Just quit, Morrison. Save yourself the embarrassment of failing publicly like your father did." He ran faster instead, pushed harder. But it wasn't just the physical punishment. That was expected. What Jake hadn't anticipated was the systematic isolation. Decker made sure Jake was always paired with the weakest swimmer during pool training, forcing him to do extra work to compensate. During land navigation exercises, Jake's compass was mysteriously miscalibrated, sending him miles off course. In the chow hall, Marines who tried to sit with Jake were suddenly reassigned to extra duty. The message was clear. Jake Morrison was alone, untouchable, marked. Except he wasn't alone. Isaiah, Tommy, and Carlos made sure of that. When Decker assigned Jake extra PT, they volunteered to join him. When Jake's gear was sabotaged, they helped him fix it. When rumors spread through the company that Jake was a security risk, the three of them shut down the talk with looks that promised violence. They became a unit, a fire team, 4 Marines moving as one, covering each other's weaknesses, amplifying each other's strengths. But Vale noticed, and he didn't like it. Week 6. The night training exercise was announced during morning formation. 72 hours in the mountains, live ammunition, full combat loads. Objective: reach a designated point 50 miles away through terrain designed to break bones and spirits in equal measure. "This is your final test before we move to advanced skills," Vale said, standing before the 30 Marines who remained. "Those who complete this exercise will continue. Those who don't will be sent home. There are no second chances. There is no mercy." His eyes found Jake. "Some of you may think you can coast on your father's reputation. Let me be clear, your bloodline means nothing here, only performance matters." That night, the teams deployed. Jake's fire team, Isaiah, Tommy, and Carlos, plus 2 other Marines who'd aligned themselves with Jake's group. 6 men against 50 miles of California wilderness. They moved through the darkness using night vision goggles that turned the world green and ghostly. The packs dug into their shoulders. The rifles grew heavier with each mile. But they moved steadily, navigating by compass and stars, avoiding the obvious trails where instructors would be waiting to ambush them with simulation rounds and forced detours. Jake led them through a creek bed, using the water to mask their movement and cool their burning feet. Tommy walked point, his city kid instincts somehow perfectly adapted to reading terrain in darkness. Carlos navigated, his steady hands keeping them on course. Isaiah walked rear guard, making sure no one fell behind. They were 12 miles in when they found the first casualty, a Marine from another team, sitting beside the trail with his ankle swollen to twice its normal size. His face was pale with pain. "Keep moving," the Marine said when he saw them. "I'm done. Ankle's broken. Medical evac is coming." Jake crouched beside him. "How'd it happen?" "Pit trap. Someone dug a hole and covered it with branches. I didn't see it until I was falling." The Marine's eyes met Jake's. "It wasn't there during the pre-exercise recon. Someone put it there after we deployed." Jake's blood ran cold. He looked at the surrounding terrain, suddenly seeing it with different eyes. This wasn't just a training exercise. This was a hunting ground. "We need to move," Isaiah said quietly. "If they're setting traps, we're sitting ducks here." Jake nodded. They left the injured Marine and pushed deeper into the mountains, moving more carefully now, checking every shadow, testing every step. The night stretched on. Hours blurred together. Exhaustion became a physical presence, a weight pressing down on their shoulders. Dawn found them on a ridgeline overlooking a valley, 30 miles covered, 20 to go. They'd made good time, better than most teams. But Jake knew that meant nothing if Vale had decided to eliminate him during this exercise. "We need rest," Carlos said. He was right. They'd been moving for 18 hours straight. Even Marines had limits. 2-hour rotation, Jake decided. 3 sleep, 3 watch. Tommy and I take first watch. They set up a defensive position behind a cluster of boulders. Isaiah, Carlos, and the 2 other Marines collapsed into immediate sleep, their bodies shutting down the moment they hit the ground. Jake and Tommy sat back to back, scanning the valley below and the trail behind. "You really think Vale would try to kill us out here?" Tommy asked quietly. I think my father discovered that Vale was selling weapons to the Taliban. I think 47 Marines died because of it. I think Vale framed my father to cover his crimes, and I think he'll do whatever it takes to make sure I don't prove it." Tommy was silent for a moment. "That's a heavy accusation, brother. You got proof?" "Not yet, but it's out there, in his office, in his files, in whatever records he's kept hidden all these years." "Then we need to get into his office." Jake turned to look at Tommy. "That's breaking and entering. Court-martial offense." Tommy grinned. "Only if we get caught. And I didn't spend my teenage years in South Boston without learning how to pick a lock." "You serious?" "Dead serious." Vale's office is in the admin building. Security is light because it's on base. We could hit it during the next major field exercise, when most of the company is deployed and he's distracted. Jake felt something shift in his chest. This was it. The moment where planning became action, where theory became reality. Once they broke into Vale's office, there was no going back. They'd be committed, all in. "We'd need someone to run lookout," Jake said. "Someone to coordinate timing. Carlos could do it. He's got a head for logistics." "And Isaiah?" "Isaiah comes with us. 3-man entry team, in and out in 15 minutes. Jake nodded slowly. The plan was insane, reckless. Exactly the kind of operation that could end with all of them in Leavenworth. But it was also the only way to get the evidence they needed. "After this exercise," Jake said, "when we're back on base, we'll do it then." "Always faithful, brother. Always faithful." They sat in silence, watching the sun rise over the valley, turning the California wilderness from silver to gold. Somewhere below, other teams were struggling through their own crucibles. Somewhere behind them, instructors were tracking their progress, measuring their worth. And somewhere in an office at Camp Pendleton, evidence waited to be found. Evidence that would either clear Jake's father's name or destroy Jake trying. The rotation changed. Jake slept for 2 hours that felt like 2 minutes. Then they pushed on, covering the final 20 miles in a blur of pain and determination. They reached the objective point with 4 hours to spare, the first team to arrive, the first to prove they had what it took. Vale was waiting at the checkpoint. He looked at Jake with something like surprise, maybe respect, maybe hatred. It was impossible to tell. "Morrison," Vale said, "didn't think you'd make it." "I did, sir." "So I see." Vale made a note on his clipboard. "You and your team are clear. Get some rest. You've earned it." Jake saluted, turned to leave, but Vale's voice stopped him. "Morrison, your father was good at field work too. Best land navigator I ever saw. Shame he couldn't navigate the moral complexities of intelligence work as well as he navigated terrain." Jake's fists clenched. Every instinct screamed to turn around to confront Vale, to demand the truth right here and now. But Isaiah's hand on his shoulder stopped him. "Let it go," Isaiah whispered. "Not here. Not now." Jake forced himself to keep walking. But inside, the fire burned hotter than ever. And he knew with absolute certainty that before this was over, one of them would break. Him or Vale, truth or lies, justice or corruption. There was no middle ground, not anymore. The break-in. 2 weeks later, the opportunity came by surprise. Major field exercise, 72 hours. All instructors and most of the training company deployed to the desert for a simulated combat operation. Only a skeleton crew remained on base to handle administration and security. Jake, Isaiah, and Tommy volunteered to stay behind as part of the headquarters element, citing minor injuries that were real enough to be documented, but not serious enough to require medical evacuation. Carlos was already assigned to headquarters running communications. The night of the second day, they made their move. 0200. The base was quiet. Most buildings were dark. Security patrols ran on a predictable schedule that Carlos had memorized over the previous week. They had a 15-minute window between patrols. Enough time if they were fast and professional. Jake, Isaiah, and Tommy moved through the darkness wearing PT gear, looking like Marines out for a late-night run if anyone spotted them. They reached the administration building without incident. Tommy pulled out his lockpicks, tools he'd carried since Boston, and went to work on the door. 30 seconds, click. The lock surrendered. They slipped inside. The building smelled like floor polish and paper. Emergency lighting cast everything in red. They moved to the second floor, to the door marked Major R. Vale, commanding officer. This lock took longer. Jake and Isaiah stood guard while Tommy worked, his fingers moving with the delicate precision of a surgeon. 2 minutes passed. 3. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. If security came now, they were finished. Click. The door opened. They entered Vale's office and closed the door behind them, sealing themselves in with the evidence of either their salvation or their destruction. Jake pulled out a small flashlight with a red filter. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a space that was exactly what he'd expected. Neat, professional, decorated with photographs of Vale shaking hands with generals and politicians, awards on the walls, books on the shelves, everything carefully curated to present the image of a model officer. But Jake wasn't interested in the image. He was interested in what hid beneath it. They split up. Isaiah took the desk. Tommy took the filing cabinets. Jake went straight to the wall safe hidden behind a Marine Corps flag. The safe was digital, 6-digit code. Jake stared at it, feeling time slip away like sand through his fingers. They had maybe 10 minutes left. Not enough time to crack it by trial and error. Then he remembered what Master Gunnery Sergeant Reeves had told him about Vale, about Senator Crawford being Vale's uncle, about family connections and political power. Jake tried Crawford's birth year. Nothing. Vale's birth year. Nothing. Then because men like Vale were predictable in their arrogance, he tried the year Operation Sandstorm happened. 2003. The safe opened. Inside, Jake found everything. Financial records showing wire transfers from shell companies with addresses in Pakistan and Afghanistan, encrypted communication logs, photographs of Vale meeting with men in traditional Afghan dress, orders he'd forged in David Morrison's name, original documents proving David Morrison had been investigating Vale months before Operation Sandstorm. And there, at the bottom of the safe, a handwritten note on official Marine Corps letterhead. Crawford, it's done. Morrison will take the fall. The 47 are acceptable losses. Nobody will question the official story. Your cut is in the usual account. Tell the general everything is contained. Vale. Jake's hands shook as he pulled out his phone and started photographing everything. Page after page, document after document. Evidence that would clear his father's name and put Vale behind bars for the rest of his life. The reference to the general made Jake pause. Was there someone even higher than Crawford involved? He photographed that note 3 times to make sure it was clear. "We got company," Tommy hissed from the door. Jake's blood ran cold. He looked up. Through the window, he could see flashlights approaching. Security patrol. Early. "How long?" Jake whispered. 30 seconds, maybe less. Jake kept photographing. Faster. His phone's camera shutter clicking softly in the darkness. Almost done. Almost there. Just a few more documents. "Morrison, we need to move now," Isaiah said. Jake grabbed the last few pages, photographed them, stuffed everything back in the safe, closed it. The lock engaged with a soft click. The flashlights were at the building entrance. "Out the window," Jake said. They moved to the window on the opposite side of the office. Jake opened it slowly, carefully, fighting the urge to rush and make noise. The window overlooked a narrow alley between buildings, 10-foot drop to the ground. Isaiah went first, dropped silently into the darkness. Tommy followed. Jake was halfway through the window when the office door opened. Light flooded the room. Staff Sergeant Decker stood in the doorway, one hand on his flashlight, the other on his sidearm. "Freeze!" Jake froze. His mind raced through options. Fight, run, talk. None of them good. But then Tommy's voice came from below. "Jump!" Jake didn't think. He dropped, trusting Tommy to be there. He fell through darkness and into Tommy's arms, the impact driving them both to the ground. "Run!" They ran. Through the alley, past buildings, behind his storage containers. Security alarms started blaring. More flashlights. Voices shouting. The entire base waking up. Jake's phone was in his pocket. The evidence was safe, but his face was burned. Decker had seen him. It was over. They made it back to the barracks, slipped in through a side door, stripped off their PT gear and climbed into their racks, hearts hammering, breath coming in ragged gasps. 5 minutes later, the lights came on. Decker stood in the doorway with 4 military police. "Morrison, on your feet, now!" Jake climbed out of his rack, stood at attention, said nothing. "You're under arrest for breaking and entering, attempted theft of classified materials, and conspiracy. You're done, Morrison, just like your traitor father." The MPs moved forward with zip-tie handcuffs. Jake didn't resist. Let them bind his hands. Let them march him out of the barracks past every other Marine in the company. Isaiah, Tommy, and Carlos watched from their racks. Jake met their eyes, gave the slightest nod. The mission was accomplished. The evidence was secured. Whatever happened now, it had been worth it. They took him to the holding cells in the base brig, locked him in, left him in darkness. Jake sat on the metal bunk and pulled out his phone before they could confiscate it. Service was blocked, but the photos were still there. Dozens of them. Clear evidence of Vale's crimes, of Senator Crawford's involvement, of the conspiracy that had killed 47 Marines and destroyed David Morrison. He needed to get these photos to someone, fast, before they took his phone. Jake accessed his email, typed in Master Gunnery Sergeant Reeves's address, attached all the photos, wrote a single line, "The truth about my father, Semper Fi." He hit send just as footsteps approached his cell. The email went through. The evidence was transmitted. Even if they destroyed his phone now, it was too late. The truth was out there. Jake deleted the sent message and the photos from his phone. When they came for it, they'd find nothing. The cell door opened. Jake looked up, expecting Vale, expecting to be interrogated, expecting the beginning of his own destruction. Instead, Master Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Reeves walked in. She looked tired in the harsh fluorescent light, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "You crazy son of a bitch," Reeves said quietly. "You actually did it." Jake stood. "You got my email?" 63 photographs, all clear, all admissible. Reeves pulled out a chair and sat. "I've already forwarded them to my contact at Naval Criminal Investigative Service. They're waking up a federal judge right now for warrants." "NCIS?" Jake's eyes widened. "You think I've just been watching you from the sidelines? I've been building a case against Vale for 2 years, working with investigators. But we needed hard evidence, something that would hold up in court. You just handed it to us." The photos show Crawford's involved, and someone called the general. Reeves nodded grimly. "General Richard Morrison, Vale's other uncle. He was the operational commander for Afghanistan in 2003. We suspected he was dirty but couldn't prove it. That note you found might be enough to bring him down too." Jake's legs went weak. He sat down hard on the bunk. "How high does this go?" "High enough that we've been working very carefully for 2 years to make sure we got everyone at once. Vale, Crawford, General Morrison, plus at least 5 defense contractors and a dozen other officers." Reeves leaned forward. "Your father died trying to expose this. You just finished his mission." Jake felt something break open inside him. The hardness that had held him together since the funeral cracked wide. His father hadn't just been innocent. He'd been a hero, fighting a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Now you stay here for appearance's sake. By morning, NCIS will have Vale in custody. General Morrison will be arrested at his home in Virginia. Crawford is already in protective custody, cutting a deal to testify against everyone else. And you'll go back to training with the cleanest record in the company." Reeves stood. "Your father would be proud, son, not because you broke the rules, but because you understood that sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. Sometimes you have to do the wrong thing for the right reason." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Get some rest, Morrison. Tomorrow your father gets his name back, and you'll have helped take down the biggest corruption ring in Marine Corps history." Reeves left. Jake lay back on the bunk, staring at the ceiling, feeling months of tension finally releasing from his shoulders. Outside, somewhere in the California night, justice was finally beginning to turn. The machine was slow. The process would take time. But the wheels were moving now, grinding toward truth with the inevitable momentum of righteousness finally given teeth. Jake closed his eyes. For the first time since his father's funeral, he slept without the weight of the world crushing down on him. And he dreamed of 47 Marines standing at attention, their faces proud, their service honored, their sacrifice remembered, always faithful to the end. His father had kept the faith. Now Jake had too. Morning came to the Camp Pendleton brig with the sound of boots on concrete and the rattle of keys. Jake had been awake for hours, sitting on the metal bunk, replaying everything in his mind. The break-in, the photographs, the evidence. Master Gunnery Sergeant Reeves's promise that justice was finally coming. The cell door opened. Not Reeves this time. 2 men in civilian clothes. Dark suits, federal badges clipped to their belts. NCIS. "Jake Morrison," the older one said. He had gray hair and the tired eyes of a man who'd spent decades wading through corruption. "I'm Special Agent Frank Chen. This is Special Agent Maria Torres. We need to talk." Jake stood. "Am I under arrest?" "That depends on how this conversation goes." Chen gestured to the bunk. "Sit." Jake sat. The agents remained standing. Chen pulled out a tablet, tapped the screen, turned it so Jake could see. The photographs Jake had taken in Vale's office filled the display. Every document, every piece of evidence, clear, damning, perfect. Master Gunnery Sergeant Reeves forwarded these to us at 0300, Chen said. We spent the last 5 hours authenticating them, cross-referencing with our own investigation, and preparing arrest warrants. Torres spoke, her voice crisp and professional. At 0600 this morning, we arrested Major Richard Vale. At 0630, FBI agents arrested Senator James Crawford at his home in Virginia. At 0700, military police arrested General Richard Morrison at his residence in Arlington. Jake's breath caught. All three? All three, Chen confirmed, plus 8 defense contractors, 6 other officers, and 2 State Department officials. This is the biggest corruption case in military history, and you broke it wide open. My father broke it open, Jake said quietly. I just finished what he started. Chen nodded. Your father, Colonel David Morrison, began investigating irregularities in weapons procurement contracts in early 2003. He discovered that Vale was approving purchases of defective equipment in exchange for kickbacks. When your father started asking questions, Vale escalated. He began selling intelligence to Taliban contacts through Pakistani intermediaries. Torres took over. Operation Sandstorm was deliberately compromised. Vale leaked the mission details to ensure it would fail. The goal was to create a scandal big enough to distract from the procurement fraud and to eliminate your father as a threat by framing him for the leak. 47 Marines died, Jake said, his voice hard. 47 Marines died so Vale and his KO conspirators could continue stealing millions from defense contracts, Chen said. They used your father as the scapegoat. The evidence was manufactured. The communications on his computer were planted. The bank accounts were fabricated. And General Morrison, as the operational commander, made sure the investigation led exactly where they wanted it to go. Jake felt rage and vindication warring in his chest. His father had been innocent. Not just innocent, but murdered for trying to do the right thing. What happens now? Jake asked. Now we prosecute, Torres said. Vale, Crawford, and General Morrison are all facing life in prison. The others will get varying sentences. But we need witnesses. People who can testify to the conspiracy, to the cover-up, to your father's character and the injustice done to him. You need me to testify. We need you to testify, Chen confirmed. Trial starts in 6 weeks. Federal court in San Diego. It will be high profile. The defense will try to destroy your credibility. They'll paint you as an unstable kid seeking revenge who broke into a superior officer's office and fabricated evidence. Let them try. Chen smiled slightly. There's something else you should know. General Morrison started talking this morning, trying to cut a deal. He confirmed everything, said Vale was the ringleader but that Crawford provided the political protection and that he, the general, provided the operational cover. He's also claiming that your father made a critical tactical error in a previous operation in Caracas that cost Marine lives. Jake's jaw tightened. Master Gunnery Sergeant Reeves told me about that. My father chose the mission over early extraction. 3 Marines died, but that doesn't make him a traitor. No, Torres said. It makes him human. The difference is your father learned from his mistakes. These men profited from theirs. Chen stood. You'll be released within the hour. No charges filed. Official story is you were working under Reeves's direction as part of the NCIS investigation. Your training will resume, and in 6 weeks you'll testify. The agents left. Jake sat alone in the cell, feeling the weight of everything settle over him like a cloak. His father was innocent. The conspiracy was exposed. Justice was coming. But there was still one thing unfinished. One person he needed to face before this was truly over. His mother. 2 weeks later. The house in rural Virginia looked smaller than Jake remembered. Or maybe he'd just grown larger in the months since his father's funeral. He stood on the porch, hand raised to knock, hesitating. Inside, he could hear movement. His mother, probably cleaning. She'd always cleaned when she was stressed. It was how she dealt with the world when the world became too much. Jake knocked. The door opened. His mother stood there, older than he remembered, thinner, with lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. She looked at him for a long moment, then her face crumpled. Jake! Hi, Mom. She pulled him inside, wrapped her arms around him, started crying. Not the bitter tears of anger and resentment. Something else. Relief, maybe? Or release. I saw the news, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. They arrested them All of them. They're saying your father was innocent, that he was murdered. He was. She pulled back, looking up at him. And you proved it. You joined the Marines and you proved it. I had help, but yeah, I proved it. His mother led him to the kitchen, made coffee. They sat at the table where Jake had eaten breakfast 1,000 times as a kid, back when his father was still alive and the world made sense. I was so angry, his mother said quietly. After the trial, after he died, I was so angry at him for not fighting harder, for not defending himself, for just accepting it. He accepted it because he thought the truth would come out eventually, Jake said. He believed in the system. In the core, he thought his brothers would believe him. But they didn't. No, they didn't. Except for Master Gunnery Sergeant Reeves, she never stopped believing. His mother wiped her eyes. I should have believed him too. I should have stood by him. Instead, I let the shame and the bitterness poison everything. I pushed him away when he needed me most. And then I tried to push you away too. You were scared. I understand that now. I was a coward. She reached across the table and gripped Jake's hand. But you weren't. You were brave enough for both of us. And now your father's name will be cleared. The Marine Corps is holding a ceremony next month. At Quantico, they're restoring his name to the Wall of Honor, presenting his Medal of Honor publicly, apologizing for what they did to him. Jake felt his throat tighten. Will you be there? Only if you want me there. I want you there, Mom. Dad would want you there. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Jake, for everything. For not believing, for pushing you away, for being too weak to fight for him. You're not weak, you're human. Dad understood that. And I think he'd forgive you. I know I do. They sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee, letting the years of pain and distance begin to heal. It wouldn't happen overnight. Some wounds went too deep for that. But this was a start, a bridge being rebuilt one conversation at a time. Are you staying in the Marines? His mother asked finally. Yeah, I've got 4 more months of reconnaissance training, then deployment. Iraq, probably, or Afghanistan. That scares me. I know, but it's what I need to do. Not for Dad anymore. For me. I want to be the kind of Marine he was. The kind who stands up when it would be easier to sit down. The kind who fights for what's right, even when everyone says it's hopeless. His mother smiled through her tears. He'd be so proud of you, not because you cleared his name, but because of who you've become. I learned from the best. Jake stayed for 3 hours. They talked about everything. About his father, about boot camp, about the investigation, about the future. And when he finally left, driving back toward Camp Pendleton, he felt lighter, more complete. His father's name would be restored. His mother was healing. The conspiracy was exposed. But there was still one more thing to do. One more person who needed to face justice. Face to face. The trial. The courtroom was packed. Federal courthouse in San Diego. Wood paneling, high ceilings, rows of benches filled with reporters, military brass, family members of the 47 Marines who'd died in Operation Sandstorm, and Marines from Camp Pendleton who'd come to see justice served. Jake sat in the witness gallery wearing his dress blues. Isaiah, Tommy, and Carlos sat beside him. Master Gunnery Sergeant Reeves sat 1 row back, her presence a silent promise of support. Major Richard Vale sat at the defense table wearing a gray suit. His uniform had been stripped away. His medals revoked. His shoulders slumped. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man who knew he was already beaten. Senator James Crawford appeared via video link from a federal detention facility. He'd cut a deal, pleading guilty to conspiracy and corruption in exchange for testifying against Vale and General Morrison. 25 years instead of life. General Morrison sat at a separate defense table. Unlike Vale, he still carried himself with military bearing. Back straight, eyes forward, defiant to the end. The prosecution was methodical. They presented documents, financial records, communications, testimony from Crawford, who detailed the entire conspiracy. How Vale had recruited him, how General Morrison had provided operational cover, how they'd framed David Morrison and orchestrated Operation Sandstorm to eliminate him as a threat. Every piece of evidence built on the last, constructing an unassailable case. Then it was Jake's turn. He walked to the witness stand, placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, sat down and looked directly at Vale for the first time since the night of the break-in. Vale wouldn't meet his eyes. The prosecutor was a sharp woman in her 40s. Former JAG officer turned federal prosecutor named Sarah Blackwell. State your name for the record. Jake Morrison, Lance Corporal, United States Marine Corps. You're the son of Colonel David Morrison? Yes, ma'am. Tell the court about your father. Jake took a breath. This was it. The moment to make the jury see David Morrison not as a name on a document, not as a traitor in a scandal, but as a man, a Marine, a father. My father was the best man I ever knew, Jake said. His voice was steady, clear. He taught me about honor before I knew what the word meant. He showed me what it meant to serve something bigger than yourself. And when the system failed him, when everyone he trusted turned their backs, he never stopped believing in the Corps. He died in a prison cell, alone, dishonored. But he died a Marine, and I'm here to make sure everyone remembers that. The prosecutor nodded. What made you suspect your father was innocent? Because I knew him, knew his character. He wouldn't betray his brothers. Not for money, not for anything. So I started digging, found inconsistencies in the official story, found evidence that had been overlooked or suppressed, and eventually I found proof that Major Vale had framed him. How did you find that proof? I joined the Marines, got assigned to Vale's training company, and with the guidance of Master Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Reeves, who was cooperating with NCIS, I accessed Vale's office and discovered documents proving the conspiracy. It was the official story, the cover that protected Jake from prosecution. Reeves had taken responsibility for ordering the break-in as part of her cooperation with investigators. The prosecutor walked Jake through everything he'd found. The photographs appeared on screens throughout the courtroom. Each document projected 10 feet tall, each piece of evidence undeniable. Then came the defense attorney, expensive suit, Harvard law degree, the kind of lawyer who defended the indefensible and slept soundly. Mr. Morrison, the lawyer began, his tone dismissive. Isn't it true that you've harbored a grudge against Major Vale since before you joined the Marines? I've held accountable whoever framed my father. When I discovered that was Vale, yes, I pursued justice. Justice, is that what you call breaking into a superior officer's office? I call it exposing corruption that cost 47 Marines their lives and destroyed a good man's reputation. A good man, the lawyer smiled. But your father wasn't perfect, was he? In Caracas, he made a tactical decision that cost 3 Marines their lives. He chose mission over extraction. Doesn't that suggest questionable judgment? Jake leaned forward. My father made a mistake in Caracas. He acknowledged it. It haunted him for years. But making one mistake doesn't make you a traitor. Profiting from the deaths of 47 Marines while destroying an innocent man's life, that makes you a traitor. He looked directly at Vale as he said it. Vale flinched. The lawyer tried for another hour, tried to shake Jake's testimony, tried to paint him as unstable, obsessed, unreliable. But Jake had spent months being broken down and rebuilt by Marine Corps drill instructors. A defense attorney was nothing compared to that. When Jake finally stepped down, he locked eyes with Vale one more time. Wanted the man to see that David Morrison's son wasn't going away, wasn't giving up. Would fight for his father's name until the last breath left his body. Vale looked away first. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict was unanimous. Major Richard Vale, guilty on all counts. Life in federal prison without possibility of parole. General Richard Morrison, guilty on all counts. Life in federal prison without possibility of parole. Senator Crawford's deal held. 25 years. Out in 20 with good behavior. 8 defense contractors. Varying sentences from 15 to 30 years. 6 officers, varying sentences from 10 to 20 years. The conspiracy was broken. The guilty were punished. The system, which had failed David Morrison so catastrophically, had finally found its spine. 1 month later, the ceremony at Marine Corps Base Quantico was scheduled for 1,000 hours on a Saturday in late autumn. The weather cooperated, delivering a crisp, clear day with blue skies and a sun that felt like vindication. Jake stood at attention in front of the Wall of Honor, wearing his dress blues. To his left stood Master Gunnery Sergeant Reeves in her dress uniform, medals covering her chest. To his right stood his mother, wearing a black dress and carrying herself with a dignity that had been absent 6 months ago. Behind them, hundreds of Marines stood in formation. Jake's fire team, Isaiah, Tommy, and Carlos. In the front row, officers from Pendleton, recruits from San Diego, Marines from bases across the country who'd come to witness this moment, the restoration of honor to one of their own. The Commandant of the Marine Corps himself presided over the ceremony. General Thomas Reynolds, a Vietnam veteran with 35 years of service and enough combat ribbons to fill 3 rows. Colonel David Morrison served this nation with distinction for 22 years, Reynolds said, his voice carrying across the assembled formation. He was a Marine's Marine, a leader who put his men first. And when he discovered corruption within our ranks, he didn't look away. He didn't stay silent. He fought. And for that, he paid the ultimate price. Reynolds paused, looked directly at Jake. But his son refused to let that sacrifice be in vain. Lance Corporal Jake Morrison joined the Marines not for personal glory, but to restore his father's honor. And in doing so, he reminded all of us what it means to be faithful. To our core, to our brothers, to the truth. A detail of Marines moved forward carrying a bronze plaque. They mounted it on the Wall of Honor, right in the center, where everyone who passed would see it. Colonel David Morrison, USMC 1969-24, faithful to the end. Jake's vision blurred. He blinked hard, forcing back tears. Marines didn't cry, not in formation, not in front of the commandant. But these weren't tears of grief. They were something else. Relief, vindication, peace. Reynolds turned to Jake's mother. Mrs. Morrison, on behalf of the United States Marine Corps and a grateful nation, I present you with your husband's Medal of Honor, which was wrongfully revoked and is now rightfully restored. He opened a wooden case. Inside, on blue velvet, lay the Medal of Honor, the pale blue ribbon, the star suspended from it, the highest honor the nation could bestow on a warrior. Jake's mother took the case with shaking hands, looked down at the medal, then up at her son. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. He'd be so proud of you, she whispered. Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. The ceremony continued. Marines from David Morrison's old unit spoke, told stories of his leadership, his courage, his willingness to stand up for what was right no matter the cost. Master Gunnery Sergeant Reeves gave a short speech about Fallujah, about how David Morrison had saved her life and the lives of 11 other Marines. And then, in a moment Jake hadn't anticipated, Isaiah Carter stepped forward. "Permission to speak, sir?" Isaiah asked the commandant. Reynolds nodded. Isaiah turned to face the formation. "I never met Colonel Morrison, but I know his son. I've trained with him, bled with him, watched him face impossible odds because he believed in something bigger than himself. And if the son is anything like the father, then Colonel Morrison must have been one hell of a Marine." The formation erupted in applause, not the polite clapping of a formal ceremony, but genuine, thunderous applause. Marines showing respect the only way they knew how. Jake felt something break and rebuild inside him all at once. He wasn't fighting alone anymore. Hadn't been alone for months. He had brothers. Had a family that extended beyond blood to include everyone who wore the uniform and lived by its code. The ceremony ended. The formation was dismissed. Jake stood before the plaque, reading and rereading his father's name. It was real, permanent, carved in bronze that would outlast everyone here. His mother appeared beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder, said nothing. Just stood there, mother and son, looking at the name of the man who'd brought them both into being and who'd died believing he'd failed them both. "He didn't fail," Jake said quietly. "He never failed. We just couldn't see it until now." "No," his mother agreed. "He never failed." They stood together until the sun began to set, then walked away from the wall, toward the parking lot, toward whatever came next. Behind them, the wall stood in the gathering darkness, names glowing softly in the security lights. David Morrison among them, honored, remembered, vindicated. 3 years later, the sun rose over Helmand Province like it had for thousands of years, before the Americans came and would for thousands of years after they left. Jake watched it from the roof of a compound in a village whose name he'd learned to pronounce through 3 deployments. Staff sergeant now, 3 chevrons, and a rocker, leading his own reconnaissance team. Isaiah was his assistant team leader, now a corporal. Tommy ran communications, loud and profane and loyal to the death. Carlos was their corpsman, the one who kept them alive when bullets flew and IEDs detonated. They'd been deployed together for 8 months, seen combat, lost friends, earned their combat action ribbons the hard way, earned the right to wear their reconnaissance insignia with pride. Jake's radio crackled. Battalion calling, orders for the next patrol, another village, more intelligence gathering. The endless rhythm of counterinsurgency operations. But before he acknowledged the call, Jake pulled out a photograph, creased and worn from being carried in his pocket for 3 years. His father in dress blues. Young, smiling, standing in front of the Wall of Honor at Quantico, back before the trial, before the betrayal, when David Morrison was just another Marine doing his job. Jake had learned something in 3 years of service. His father wasn't a saint, wasn't perfect, had made mistakes in Caracas, had been too trusting, too honorable for the world he lived in. But he'd been faithful. And in the end, that mattered more than success or failure or even life or death. Faithful to the end, Jake tucked the photograph away, keyed his radio. Echo 2 actual, Roger, moving in 15 mics. He turned to his team, his brothers, the men who'd followed him through boot camp, through reconnaissance training, through the trial, through deployment after deployment. Mount up, we got work to do. They moved with practiced efficiency. Gear checked. Weapons loaded. Game faces on. Just another patrol in a war that seemed to have no end. But for Jake Morrison, every patrol had meaning. Every mission was a chance to be the Marine his father had been, to serve with honor, to lead with integrity, to be faithful to brothers who deserved nothing less. He looked back one more time at the rising sun. Somewhere back home, his father's name was carved on a wall. His medal was displayed in a case in Jake's mother's living room. His sacrifice was remembered. His mother had started volunteering at a veterans center, helping other military families navigate the system that had once crushed her. She'd found purpose in her pain, found a way to honor her husband's memory that didn't involve bitterness or shame. And here, in the dust and heat and danger of a foreign war, his son carried on the work, the mission, the faith. The radio crackled again. Intel update. The village they were heading toward had possible Taliban presence. High risk, potential contact. Isaiah looked at Jake. You sure about this one? Jake thought about his father, about the choice David Morrison had made in Caracas. Mission over extraction, a choice that had cost 3 Marines their lives and haunted his father for years. We go in smart, Jake said. We go in prepared, but we go. These people need us, and Marines don't abandon people who need them. Even if it's dangerous? Especially if it's dangerous. That's when it matters most. Isaiah nodded. Tommy grinned. Carlos crossed himself quickly, a habit from his Texas upbringing. They loaded into the vehicles, 4 Marines heading into potential combat, not because they loved war, but because they loved their brothers, because they'd sworn an oath, because they were faithful. The convoy rolled out, dust plume rising behind them, sun climbing higher. Another day in a long war, another mission in service of something bigger than themselves. Jake thought about the wall at Quantico, about his father's name carved in bronze, about all the names surrounding it, Marines who'd served, who'd sacrificed, who'd kept faith. And he understood, finally, what it all meant. Not the combat or the medals or the ceremony, but the simple act of showing up, of doing the hard thing when it would be easier to quit, of being faithful when faithfulness cost everything. His father had done that, had shown up every day, had fought for what was right, had paid the ultimate price but had never surrendered his integrity. And now Jake was doing the same, not because he had to prove anything, but because it was who he was, who his father had raised him to be. A Marine, faithful to the end. The convoy disappeared into the Afghan desert. Behind them, the compound fell silent. Ahead, the village waited. Somewhere in between, the ghosts of 47 Marines watched over them. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, Colonel David Morrison smiled. His son had learned the most important lesson, the one that mattered more than any tactic or technique or triumph. Show up. Stand up. Never surrender who you are, no matter what the world tries to make you become. Be faithful. Always faithful. To the end and beyond. End.